name is Alexander Iles and I run Iles Tours, and we're going to be talking about the Quayside now. So Newcastle's Quayside has actually got a lot of history and heritage behind it, and we're going to start off by going right back to the Stone Age. So suddenly as the Ice Age started to end, you've got the huge amounts of glacial meltwater that's come down here, and when it comes down here it creates the Tyne Valley as we know it today. So we have this huge amount of water coming through here, and the early Celts had a huge significance to water. It had amazing religious significance because the Celts believed that water was the crossing point between the world of their gods and our world. So there's a lot of significance for that, and here in Newcastle you can see it in the sacrifices that have been found in and around the Tyne. So the first one I like to talk about is in the 1880s when they were building the old post office building, which is up near Newcastle's castle. They actually discovered a Neolithic canoe, and this canoe had actually never been used. It had been built purposefully for the purpose of actually being buried, and it's one of 4 votive offerings that have been found along the Tyne Valley, and it was buried with large animal bones and items of importance. So you've got this immediate sacrifice here of a high value object in the Tyne Valley location that immediately shows that our proto-Celtic ancestors considered the river of immense importance. You've also got the fact that the Tyne's name is the same as the Thames and the Tees. It's all from the same Celtic root word, and it means strength or power. And so when you've got this river that means strength or power, you've got this huge importance to the local peoples of the region. Now in the Celtic period, the Tyne is actually the second largest river in Britain for Celtic sacrifices, and this is normally, when people hear this, they think of possibly South America, the Aztecs, the Incas, and human sacrifice. And even though the Celts actually practiced human sacrifice sometimes in some areas, here this is more about votive offerings, and they'd take something like a sword or a piece of jewellery or something like that, and they'd throw it into the river. And the location where they find this is near King's Meadow down near Elsick. And this is actually because it was an easier point to ford the Tyne at that period. So when you've got these items being thrown in, because of Hollywood, when we look at swords, we often look at them and we think that they were a really easy item to find. Everyone would have a sword. But in fact, it's the equivalent of taking a luxury sports car and just driving it into the Tyne. It is a huge, huge sacrifice, and it's of incredible importance. So when the Celts were sacrificing into the river, that suggests the importance of the river to them, and also they were making a huge statement and a huge gamble when they made these sacrifices. Moving on into the next period, when the Romans arrived here, they actually built their fort, the first fort on of Hadrian's Wall, Pontus Allius, just above the river. And so when they built Pontus Allius, it was a huge statement. It was a statement of the fact that this is Roman territory now. We're actually going to build on top of an area of important religious significance to you guys, and we're going to control this site. And they built the first actual bridge across the Tyne in this location too, and that was called Pontus Allius. Pontus is the Latin word for bridge, and Allius was Emperor Hadrian's family name. So you have this important bridge which is 735 foot long because of the actual much larger Tyne at that period. So when the Romans were here, this was an important, significant crossing point, and it had control over the area. And we know the Roman bridge was roughly where the swing bridge is, because when the Victorians were building the swing bridge, they discovered 2 shrines, one to Oceanus, the Roman god of the oceans, and one to Neptune, the god of the seas and rivers. So it was an incredibly important location for the Romans as a crossing point. As the Romans left, the Anglo-Saxons moved in, and we know that there was an Anglo-Saxon settlement across in Gateshead, and the Anglo-Saxons across in Gateshead lived in a monastery which was ruled by an Abbot Utter, as mentioned in Bede's works. But here in Newcastle, we're still not really sure what was here. There's a number of different options, from a settlement called Ad Murium to a location called Muncaster, but we know that there were probably people inhabiting the old Roman fort. Jumping on into the Norman period, the Normans arrived here, and much like the Romans, they realised the importance and the significance of this crossing point. So using the location of the old Roman fort, they built the new castle, which was a wooden Motte and Bailey castle, and remained the castle in that area right up until the 1167, when it burnt down, and they rebuilt it in stone under the rule of King Henry II, and it was built by Maurice the engineer, one of his brilliant military engineers of the period. And so that's where you get the modern Newcastle. So Newcastle quickly developed as a medieval trading location, with merchants coming from all over Europe to trade in Newcastle's wool, hides, beer, salt, glass and coal. And alongside this, you have to imagine that these merchants were coming from northern France, from the Benelux, from North Germany, from Scandinavia and the Baltic states, all to trade here. So it was a very, very multinational and international port. Another prominent building that dominated the quayside was the Hospital of St. Thomas's, which was a medieval monastery and hospital where the monks would treat people with medical cures, but it also worked much like a hostel, so travellers could stay there. It had an upper room as well where the merchants of Newcastle would conduct their business. Now, the Protestant Reformation totally transformed Newcastle in many ways because it removed the old monasteries and the medieval Catholicism that had been a major part of Newcastle's heritage, but it also meant that the Bishop of Durham, his coal leases were then up for sale, and they sold them to a group of merchants in Newcastle. This increased the amount of business and commerce coming through because Newcastle became a major location for the trade of coal, and it created a new group of workers here on the quayside as well, the keelmen. Now, the keelmen were a very fractious bunch. They would often have fights down here on the quayside. They were famous for being very, very Scottish and with their ethnic groups as well. And they worked down here on the quayside, and they had a monopoly on carrying all of the coal along the river. So when they transported the coal along the river, they would actually go out of their way to stop other people from doing this as well. So they'd set fire to the strafes, they'd have fights with other people who tried to undercut them, and they were very much in control of the quayside. Now, the medieval fabric of the quayside was totally and utterly destroyed in 1854 on the 9th of October. And what happened was, across in Gateshead, where we today have the Sage, there was actually a large chemical works, and it caught fire in the night. That actual fire spread to the point where it exploded, and when it exploded, the explosion was heard in Alnwick and Berwick and was seen in Northallerton and Sunderland, and coal miners in the deepest coal mine in Britain, down in Sunderland, 2 miles under the ground, came to the surface to see what happened. Just in one night, the majority of the medieval quayside was entirely gone, either blown over by the force of the explosion or had been burnt to the ground, and so it's redeveloped with the modern quayside that you see here today, with the stone buildings that are here. Following on from that, the quayside was also transformed when the swing bridge was built in 1876, because the swing bridge, for the first time since the creation of the Roman bridge, enabled for boats to go all the way up to Elsick and beyond, and developed for the shipbuilding industry to really take off, such as Lord Armstrong's works down in Elsick, which produced a great deal of commercial and industrial and also warships for the entire world. Following on from that, with the end of heavy industry in the 1970s and 1980s here in the northeast of England, this meant that the quayside was transformed again because it was quite a dilapidated area of the city. There wasn't much investment into this location, and so the quayside and Newcastle struggled because of this. So during the 1990s and the early 2000s, there was a great deal of investment into Newcastle and Gateshead's quayside, and from that you can see how the quayside today has become a location where people come here for a social life, they come here for parties, for entertainment. Also, it's become much more of a business location as well, maybe more like the medieval period, but without the merchants loading and unloading goods on the quayside hub as you see today. With the deindustrialisation of Newcastle and Britain following the 1970s, 1980s and into the 1990s, the quayside's transformed a great deal. So from being a location where people would build ships down here and coal would be exported, it's now become a very much a leisure part of Newcastle. So people come down here to the quayside to enjoy a weekend, to enjoy social activities, and you can really see that in the redevelopment along the quayside. So for instance, we've now got locations like the Sage and the Baltic on the Gateshead quayside, and the Newcastle quayside has a very thriving location down at the Ousburn. I really hope that you've enjoyed this and that we've been able to show you a new part of Newcastle's history down here on the quayside, but also to share some of the stories. Please like, favourite and subscribe, share the story with someone else, and we look forward to seeing you on the tour in the near future. Thank you.